Hey everybody, welcome to our quick video about how we're going to deal with problematic seams in Kolor AVP. Now there are a couple of versions of Kolor that are out right now. The Autopano Video Pro is in version 2.6.2 on my machine. There are additional updates to it from that, and there's even a better update at 3.0 that I'm assuming is going to have some of these exact same features. But as we step up through those different iterations of the program, the stuff I'm showing you today is applicable to the old stuff, the new stuff, and everything in between. At some point when you're shooting video, you're going to have to dig into the seams and deal with how different elements between overlapping pieces of footage just aren't quite getting along. And that's what we're going to cover today. So there are two tools to do that with, and that's going to be the control point tool as well as the masking tool, in that order. Quick Stitch does a good job of assembling everything, put it in the right place initially. There's always a need to dig in professional work. You always want to go in deeper and get into that kind of Photoshop level of really moving everything where you want it. So now that we've got our Quick Stitch piece of footage, I'm going to jump over to Giga. So we've got three pieces of footage on this tail light. Let's just start with this guy. We've got a number 7, we have a number 6, and a number 5, all competing to define what this tail light needs to look like. And with that, we have a little bit of a conflict here. Whenever I want to preview something in Giga to see what the finished stitch is going to look like if I were to render it right now, I use the Move tool. I go to the Move tool, I choose the entire panel, and then hit the Preview button. And when we hit the Preview button down below, like this, it pulls it together so that you can see as closely as possible what the finished stitch is going to look like if you were to render right now. And as you can see, we're so close. It pulled it together really nicely, actually. The only thing I'm seeing here is that if I were to look at this closely in an HMD, I definitely would notice that there's a tiny little line here. We don't want that kind of stuff sitting around in our footage on something as smooth and iconic as the look of an automobile and even the taillight. So let's dig in with the control points first. The first place I go to try and pull a stitch together, always, is the control points. By pulling it together, you're reducing the amount you need to mess with any part of the stitch because it's actual clean stitched content that you're starting from to use the additional tools to sort of work around it and make it look even more perfect. So let's dig into those control points. It's asking me to do a quick optimization. I'm going to let it do that. And every time I'm doing that, really all it's doing is what we're going to do and step into a couple times here in this next example. We're just creating more control points and telling it to cinch tighter and tighter each time. Let's see how we do that. So I'm going to go in here, and I knew that when I looked at the control point tool before, we had numbers 5 and 6 kind of competing here. These two guys right here. I know that 7 is coming into play. I know it's coming swooping up from the bottom and affecting it, but I think most of the real conflict that's going on here is between 5 and 6. So let's go into the control point editor. Sometimes these tools can kind of get hidden, and if you need to find them, just double click on this little guy, and 9 times out of 10 it'll come up. So give us a little room here. We're going to find 5 and 6. We're going to see that we've got an initial number of control points that look pretty satisfactory here in terms of the number of them. We see that we've got a bunch of them on top of the car, a bunch of them off even into the sky in the background behind it, but it really didn't do as much as we probably need it to right there on the taillight. I'm going to zoom in even a little bit more on the taillight. And I'm going to just take a really close look. I know the biggest issue is where we have these orange points here. I'm going to look at that most closely and then cross compare that to this guy here. Let's just take a look at this. You can see we've got some, but not enough. Let's see if we can do this. With the automatic control point tool selected, we're going to hover over the area of interest. It essentially doubled or tripled the number of points there. Most of these turned up green or greenish. They go from green to orange to eventually red. If they're red, don't let that stop you. Don't let that be an indicator that you have made some kind of an error or that this isn't working, because really what is going to happen is that's giving you the initial RMS, or the root mean square, of the actual likelihood of these 2 points matching. But when you let the algorithm actually run and you let it determine, okay, let's just see, and actually we'll use it here, the optimization button here, you'll see these actually turn a different color. They brightened up, they became a lighter green because they figured out that they do belong together. So you're essentially writing the roadmap or creating the connect the dots for the program and telling it more specifically the areas it needs to concentrate on more. And then it's going back in and using its algorithm to tighten all that up, which is pretty awesome. Thank you, Kolor. So as I look at all this, I'm seeing this look like it just assembled a bunch of new points that are more relatable to one another. Now let's actually see in our stitch by jumping into the move tool again with preview on, whether or not that did anything to make a difference for us. And we don't have to jump back in and out every single time. We can kind of leave this here and come in really close. It tightened it up. We want it a little tighter. I know I want it a little bit closer than that. We can do better. So here I'm going in even tighter. I'm going to select this area, just the area of interest. I'm doing it a couple times, going over kind of doubling up in the same area. I'm hitting the quick optimization. I saw a little bump when I go back over to my preview. I can definitely see that it's getting better and better and better and better. Now we're getting closer, and I could spend 20 minutes on this one spot, letting it slowly cinch, deleting these. Let me show you really quick how to delete those points in case you do want to try this. And you take this and kind of go, all right, well, I know in that very specific spot, right where it makes that curve, I deleted them. I still have it on the automatic control point creation tool. And I'm going to just kind of choose all that again. Let's let it kind of generate some. Let's see if it can just make some more right there. It looks like it doesn't really want to be honest, which isn't the greatest. There we go. So it popped them in there. Now let's do it. Let's optimize it again. Oh, now when it cinches it up, it's getting closer. Minute by minute, as I work on that, you can get it closer. Now, if I could bring that closer and do it only with control points, that is the way I would do it. But I know that there's a quicker way to do it in this case because it's a lock position and I have some obscure information or picture information below where this light is. This linear line is extremely important and obvious when it's incorrect. But all of this obscure material and this black color down here underneath the car, that's actually an area where I can kind of cheat a little bit. Same goes for foliage in the trees. The sky especially is a great place to hide a seam. Anytime you have like a lot of organic material on a wall, like a brick surface that doesn't have a bunch of linear lines in it, like a stucco or some kind of a concrete material that's obviously kind of grainy or earthy toned, you can hide seams in that very easily. Where you can't hide seams very easily are in linear lines like this, or lines that are very specific and obvious where they're supposed to be, or on people's faces, or on people's knees or ankles. Those are places where a lot of times you can't just hide it because the subject of the shot is going to be more obvious than the obscure areas. And also the actual material that's around it, it's harder to hide it in it. So do yourself a favor, give yourself a break, hide the seams if you can on a lock position in the obscure areas. Let's take a look at the next tool we're going to use to do that with, and that is the masking tool. I like to use the on whole stack tool, and then I'm just going to simply take this seam that we see right here, and I'm just going to tell it, instead of hanging out over the top and crisscrossing over the top of this one element that we know has to look perfect, we're going to put that element in just one of the pieces of footage and let the seam ride underneath it. Here we go. We're going to add our first masking point right here. Dramatic change to where the seam's located. We're going to push it back with this. And now we knew we had 3 pieces of footage that were competing. Let's push it back this way with this piece. Now let's take a look at where that sits. Ultimately, we're going to need to be a little bit more intricate about where we're weaving this seam. So let's take this. Masking points are cheap. They don't cost a thing. Use them. Don't worry as much about moving constantly, moving the points that you've put in place. Add new ones and just sort of let that creep. And let it sort of build its way into a structure where all the points are sitting where they're supposed to be to make it look like a mount. Now, when you scroll and use the scroll wheel, this little guy, you'll even see as I go over this, you see that vibration on the screen? What's that's actually doing is it's selecting different layers that are on top of one another. So these three pieces of footage that are on top of each other, you're telling it when you scroll, switch it, now use this one, and the masking points that are on this one. Oh, now switch it back, now use the masking points that are on this one. Extremely handy tool. Sometimes it takes people a minute to find that, so let's just know that that's there right now. Get used to it, remember it's there, it's going to save you tons of time. Here we're going to push this seam down beyond this tire. We're going to reclaim it over here using the scroll wheel. I popped into the one underneath it, the one we want to be manipulating right now. I'm going to even move this over a little bit here just because I don't like that even this reflection is sort of something we don't want to have messed up. Looking good here. I know this bumper probably needs to look 100%. So let's just push this all the way down to the pavement. Okay, but pretty much as far as it'll go. You want to be careful masking so far that you're getting to the very edge, like this very edge of the footage here. I can tell just by its perfect curvature that that's actually the very edge of the footage. What happens when we do that is sometimes you get to the very edge where it starts to create, it brings the vignetting of the footage into the shot, and you get this little ghosting black line, just like a little smoke right where that is, and we want to avoid that. So even pushing that up a few pixels can help alleviate that potential problem, and you don't have that aesthetic issue then in your shot. So that's all looking pretty solid. I'm liking this. I'm going to pull back from this a little bit and take a look at what we've got. We affected some of the things up here, how this seam rides across the surface of the top of the car now, and I think we need to address that. So obviously we're messing up a little bit of, not there, but here, we're messing up the roof rack right where it meets in the back, and also we're touching on this back window a little bit. Let's just move this a little. When you get used to where these masking points affect things most, you end up not having to do as many. Your first couple of rounds, you might use a ton of them. Just experiment with it. Don't be afraid to get used to the nuance of kind of how far that, that area of effect that it actually creates. Instead of thinking of it as an exact target of the pixels you want to control, it actually has sort of an area of effect that's bigger on the shot. And you get used to where that sits the more you use it. But it's a really powerful, and I find it to be a really consistent tool. I'm going to move this in place. I'm not going to mess with this much more. Just going to kind of send this right off the front of the roof. And I'm going to just clean this up a little bit right where it meets at the top here so that it looks just clean where the seam of the body meets with that. Just a little better. I'm going to run it right across this tailgate. This last couple of seconds of actually taking the time to see it can make all the difference. We're going to jump into the preview, and I might spend just another minute right there. For the sake of this video, I'm going to skip it, but this all can obviously be really clean. As we go down through here, we look at a tail light that is now completely together. So it's all in one of the cameras, and instead of it being split with the seam now rides underneath. Voila! So that's it for this video. We hope that you learned something and it'll help you out on your next production. Subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.